Hello and welcome to the Higher Association Europe's Social Distancing Practical Guide webinar. My name is Paul Gaze and I'm going to moderate today's webinar. I'm joined by our Director of Certification, Carl Bartlett. This is the second in a planned series of 4 webinars over the next 2 weeks. Since the beginning of the year, the whole world has been dealing with the spectre of the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. As your trade association, we are here to assist you, offering objective advice, guidance and support. We have continued to do this throughout the pandemic, and our staff are on the case, working from home to support you and your businesses. This webinar is a series that we've introduced for our members. We'll record it for those who are unable to join us at this time and want to find out a bit more about the subject matter. We've already had a few people ask us for the recording first thing this morning, as they're unable to join us at this time. If you have any questions, please submit them through the webinar chat on your screen. The buttons are there, and we'll seek to address them at the end of the webinar. If we can't address them then, we will send them out with the recording on the Q&A side of things. I'm also delighted to advise that HE members now have access to an e-learning platform. This will allow people to find further information and update their skills. As we record this webinar, the first 2 e-learning modules have now gone live. I'll mention this later at the end of the webinar just to tell you how to access these, but on to today. And I'd like to introduce Carl Bartlett, our Director of Certification, to give us the background to our webinar subject today. Carl, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Hello, everyone. The development of social distancing practical guidance for hire centres was born out of various items, advice given from stakeholders, governments, agencies and other groups. The idea was to bring together in one place to offer practical advice and areas for members to consider. The draft document was first reviewed by the HAE EHA Technical Health and Safety Panel on the 6th of May. The guidance document is reviewed on a regular basis, and we are happy to receive any feedback from our members. We have links on our website for the document. The guidance has been promoted via our regular COVID Spotlight emails, which we send out to members. Hopefully, you will have seen or accessed the COVID-19 daily advice for members. You can also access the guide from the homepage of our website. The first thing to say, I think, is that it's critical you check the guidance wherever you are located in the UK or overseas, for example, in the Republic of Ireland. Our guidance document has links to the relevant government websites for this. It's a good point, I feel, to say that the advice on social distancing measures applies to everyone. We must all do what we can to minimise the opportunities for the virus to spread by simple things, including maintaining social distancing of 2 meters between individuals. This applies to your business, including the external public areas where customers may need a queue. Hands must be washed in keeping with the government health authority advice with soap and warm water for a minimum of 20 seconds. Hands should be washed more frequently than normal, and hand sanitizer should be provided and used regularly. I think these are the basic key elements that we have to get used to moving forwards. Another effective way that we should consider when we're dealing with the coronavirus is providing clear guidance. We should provide clear guidance on social distancing and hygiene to employees, to customers and visitors on arrival. For example, using signage and visual aids. Consider both the number of employees and customers that can reasonably follow 2 meter social distancing on the premises, and take into account the total floor space as well as likely pinch points in busy areas. These are often the entrance or exit to and from the premises, which we must consider and control. An effective way of communicating and engaging our teams is to hold toolbox talks and staff briefings. By doing this, we can remind all the staff to maintain 2-meter social distancing requirements. Remind them all to wash their hands regularly, particularly prior to use of any of the kitchen or canteen equipment, such as the fridge, the microwave, kettles. Items left in the fridges must be thoroughly cleaned as well. Remind staff not to touch their face if they've not washed their hands. This is how infection can be transmitted, and remind all staff to use hand sanitizers on a regular basis. We should also be mindful that we shouldn't touch our face even if we've got gloves on as well. And this is a common misconception of people that think they're wearing gloves that they can touch the face, but the gloves also can transmit the infection. Government health authority advice for working from home. In England, as advised by Public Health England particularly, it suggests that we should work from home wherever possible still. And further details can be found at the government websites. You'll no doubt be aware that it's a requirement to carry out a risk assessment, as well as reviewing your existing risk assessments and safe working procedures in light of the risks associated with COVID-19 for people who are attending work. And why? Because we've got legal and moral obligations to do this. An assessment of the risks posed by COVID-19 in the workplace should be carried out and shared with the workforce. If possible, you should consider publishing it on your company's website. The current gov.uk guidance details that publishing of records of COVID-19 risk assessments is expected of all businesses with employees over 50. That's over 50 employees, sorry, not over 50 in age. Under the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999, the minimum you must do is identify what could cause injury or illness, which reflects COVID-19 in your business. Decide how likely it is that someone could be harmed, and in this case infected, and how seriously the risk is. Take action to eliminate the hazard, or if it's not possible, we've got to control the risks. So with this in mind, we have a scenario for many working in the construction and the related supply chain that their job requires them to travel to work. And the guidance we've prepared is simply to assist us in understanding whether or not it is appropriate for workers to travel to work. Although our sector was previously considered to be covered under the building supplies, the latest government guidance relating to businesses permitted to continue trading now states homeware, building supplies and hardware stores, including where those stores supply equipment for hire. So we will talk about this in a little more detail as we continue. So to start off with, I think it's a good starting point moving forwards to talk about requirements on arrival at work. It's important that staff attending work wash their hands on arrival and prior to touching any surfaces. I think it's fair to say that they should be doing this regularly, and it's worth considering doing this hourly from there on in, from arrival at work. It's become very clear that hand washing hygiene measures, including routine cleaning and sanitization of touch surfaces and avoiding hand contact with the face, are the most effective ways of minimizing the risk of infection. When we're carrying out reviews, we've mentioned that we have to review the risks of the COVID-19 on our business and the way we operate. This includes other areas of our business, including fire safety arrangements and first aid arrangements. Do we have enough first aiders on site? Because of the COVID-19 restrictions, have we been able to update the training? If we haven't, do we need to apply for an extension to our first aid training certificates? Have we communicated the arrangements? Do we have enough fire marshals on site when it comes to fire evacuation? It's worth notable to say that when there is a fire evacuation or an accident or incident, people don't necessarily need to stay 2 meters apart if it would be unsafe. And anyone involved in the assistance of others should pay particular attention to sanitization measures immediately after, including washing their hands. So with traveling to work, anyone who's symptomatic of COVID-19 must follow the specific advice published on your local government website, including Public Health England. And we should encourage staff who are unwell to contact their manager before attending work. If they are symptomatic, encourage them to stay at home and contact their GP or check the health service website for the further details. Similarly, encourage colleagues not to leave home if they or someone they live with has any of the following symptoms: high temperature, a new continuous cough, a loss or change to the sense of smell or taste. Self-isolating. Anyone who is symptomatic of COVID-19 should follow similar advice from the health authority and the local government. Those who live alone and have symptoms of COVID-19, however mild, must stay at home for 7 days from when the symptoms started. Those living with others and who are the first in the household to have symptoms of COVID-19 must stay at home for 7 days. But all other household members who remain well must stay at home and not leave the house for 14 days. The 14-day period starts from the day when the first person in the house became ill. Information regarding testing has been updated with the increasing ambition to complete more testing by the local government. Details can be found at the government website for coronavirus testing. Wherever possible, workers should travel alone using their own transport. Where it is only possible for workers to share transport, they should share transport with the same individuals and the minimum number of people at any one time. Pairing is a good way of doing this. If you have people who are working together during the course of the day and they can travel to work together, this is an ideal way of managing that process. Keeping windows open for ventilation and facing away from each other in vehicles. Avoid touching surfaces unnecessarily. This may also reduce the risk of transmission of infection. Cleaning the vehicle regularly with standard cleaning products whilst wearing gloves, with particular attention to surfaces, handles that passengers may touch. We can consider alternatives to public transport, such as cycling or walking. Consider the need for additional parking or secure and safe storage of colleagues' cycles. It's a good time of year for people to cycle to work, with the weather being a little bit better, but in the winter, obviously, it might be a bit more difficult. Check the relevant guidelines from your local government health authority to ensure that you have a plan to consider and manage the risks appropriately. A team approach is good. Thinking about things you should provide and undertake. We mentioned in our documentation a daily checklist for having staff briefings and toolbox talks. These are an ideal way of communicating what your expectations are with your staff and your colleagues, and how they communicate this to visitors to the premises, so everybody's clear and has a good understanding of what the company's expectations are. And we can use this to remind staff of the social distancing requirements, the requirements to wash their hands when they're attending work and after rest periods, and use of kitchen and canteen facilities. We can use this to advise staff that items left in the fridges must be thoroughly cleaned. Washing cups after use, or putting them in the dishwasher where we have these available. We should make it clear to staff that they mustn't cut corners, and safety guidance must be followed at all times. We should manage this effectively and make sure that people are adhering to our requirements. Advise staff and display notices to remind them of the government guidance with regards to washing hands, particularly in the washroom areas. And again, not to touch their faces Remind staff of the symptoms and basic precautions, including coughs or sneezes into a tissue or the crook of their elbow, and to dispose of tissues into plastic bags that can be tied and disposed of into appropriate waste container at the end of the day. This is best done with lids, bins with lids. Dispose of the appropriate waste containers at the end of the day into the waste receptacles that are prepared for collection from the waste management companies. I think it's a good idea also to have an end of day routine that we all get into the habit of completing. This is not going to go away very quickly, and we need to get into a routine and become accustomed to living with the virus. So it's important to have an end of day routine where we sanitize touch points, door handles, push pads, handrails, telephones, desks, keyboards, controls of forklifts, vehicle controls, and so on and so forth. We should clear desks of items other than computer screen, terminals and keyboards and telephones, and store things away in drawers once they've been wiped down. So before leaving work, remind the staff to stay safe after leaving work by following the social distancing guidelines and cleansing at home. We should make it a point of thanking all the staff for their efforts in compliance and encourage staff to come forward with any concerns or queries in order that we can appropriately address them. As previously mentioned, it's important to give clear guidance on social distancing and hygiene to employees, customers and visitors on arrival. This can be done again by signing guidance and having measures in place to welcome our visitors. Another way of managing social distancing is by flexible working hours and split shifts. Consider where practicable to minimize the risk of people gathering and breaches of social distancing requirements. We can consider a staggered start and finish times, as well as staggered breaks, and ensure that the same individuals continue to share shifts where possible. This would minimize the risk of unnecessary contact. We are required to provide appropriate PPE as determined by our risk assessments and safe working practices to all operatives working on our premises. We should review the need for additional PPE to that already determined, including disposable gloves, for example. We should also provide hand sanitizers and antibacterial wipes. UK and devolved administrations have published guidance for specific sectors outside health and social care with regards to PPE and how these sectors should be using the PPE. We must be mindful that we must continue. If we've already provide PPE for specific tasks and activities, we should continue to do so. Further details can be found at the newly created PPE Guidance Hub by visiting the government coronavirus COVID-19 personal protection equipment website location. For all other workers and sectors, based on current evidence, there is little evidence of scientific evidence of widespread benefit from PPE with regards to face masks. Instead, practicing good hygiene and social distancing are key to minimizing the risk of infection. Within the higher centres, we should consider operating a one phone, one computer terminal, and one card payment machine per person policy wherever this is practicable. These items of equipment should be sanitized following contact by customers. Be mindful that electronic equipment may be damaged by excessive moisture ingress from wet cloths or sprays and present a risk of electric shock. Therefore, we should also observe the manufacturer's recommendations for cleaning this type of equipment. General work equipment cleaning practices. We should consider and plan a regime for wiping down, disinfecting desks, trade counters, telephones, stationary equipment. This should be done regularly with antibacterial wipes or sprays and cloths. We should dispose of the wipes in a refuse sack. After tying these, they should be transferred to the general waste management receptacles, at least at the end of each day. Review the layouts to allow workers to work further apart from each other. Desks and seating in rest or break areas may need to be repositioned in order to achieve 2-meter social distancing requirements. When reviewing the social distance arrangements for the premises, we should consider introducing one-way flows through the buildings, providing directional flow markings and signage, which will remind the workforce and customers to follow social distancing requirements wherever possible. Encourage the use of stairs where possible, and regulate the use of high traffic areas, including corridors, lifts and walkways, to maintain social distancing. Ensure that washroom and toilet facilities are cleaned and sanitized regularly. Each day is a minimum, with particular attention to frequently touched areas, including toilet doors, locks, seats, flush handles, taps, etc. And consider additional signage to encourage hand washing. Okay, moving on to slide 9, the arrangements for customer collection. We should encourage customers at appropriate opportunities. For example, when we're making pre-arranged hire arrangements and taking telephone orders. This is an ideal opportunity to notify the clients to attend at specified collection times in order to space collections and minimize the number of visitors attending the premises at any one time. We should advise the customers collecting or returning goods of the changes in our processes and control measures introduced, including distancing arrangements at the premises, such as parking, handover procedures, where we've designated dispatch or return areas and collection areas, and for unloading and loading vehicle requirements. The distance and control arrangements for customers should include external separation by perhaps crowd control barriers and directional signage externally. One of the common issues that have come to light throughout the preparation of our guidance, and from experience as well, is that there's risks associated in our industry with two-person close proximity lifting of equipment. There's many items of equipment in our hire fleets that require a two-person close proximity lift. The risk associated with hiring equipment which requires a two-person close proximity lift must be suitably assessed, and they may not be deemed permissible on products where social distancing arrangements cannot be suitably achieved. We should consider, we should give consideration to loading and unloading vehicles particularly, and also to movement of equipment by the customer using the equipment. Manual handling equipment should be considered to avoid close proximity lifts. If a close proximity lift is absolutely necessary, we may consider that this can be carried out, providing that we minimize the time to the absolute minimum. And if necessary, we could provide face masks. Face masks are not the best way of controlling the spread of the infection because people touch them, which contaminates the masks. They're not practicable for being used for long periods of time. PP is disposable with regards to paper or cloth face masks. And it's generally considered good practice with the shortages that we focus on allowing the supply chain to deliver the FFP3 type masks and even FFP2 type masks to those who most require it in social and healthcare environments. With regards to the manual handling aids, We should make sure that we sanitize the handles of trolleys and material handling device and controls immediately following use. We should demonstrate that to our customers the steps that our businesses are taking to protect them. And by doing these measures, this promotes that we are taking responsible measures to protect both our colleagues and our clients. We may need to consider regulating the entry to the premises so they don't become overcrowded. Also providing pop-up hand washing stations or facilities, providing soap and water or hand sanitizers at the entrance to our businesses. Using floor markings inside the depot facilitate compliance with social distancing of 2 meters, especially at serving counters and payment terminals. Hazard warning tape may be an appropriate measure of achieving this, as well as directional signage. As with the 2-person close proximity lifts, we also have the close proximity work issue, similar to people traveling in vehicles. And this also extends to maintenance activities that cannot be redesigned. And again, we must minimize the period of close proximity work and consider employee pairing to complete maintenance work that cannot be redesigned to eliminate people coming together. One of the key areas within our business, which is one of the most busy activities, if you like, is the cleaning of hire equipment. And we have to consider the touch points again prior to the issue of equipment to ensure that equipment controls and switches and handles, steering devices have been sanitized to reduce the potential risk of spreading infections. It's advisable not to use wet sanitizing products again on electrical switches or equipment controls where this may present a risk of electric shock. So usually damp wipes with dry disposable paper towels, for example, and dispose of them immediately after use. We can, of course, consult with equipment manufacturers to determine their recommendations for cleaning equipment, particularly those touch points and switches or other electrical controls. Depending on the environment in which the hired equipment is to be used and the requirements of the hirer, it may be considered good practice to wrap touch points with cling stretch wrap where it's safe and practicable to do so, following cleaning and sanitization to minimize the risk of contact until the point of handover of equipment when the protective film can be removed. We've seen this process carried out by our friends in the catering industry, where they use this method once they've cleaned catering equipment to ensure that the risk of contamination has been minimized. And this is probably going to be appropriate specifically to healthcare environments and nursing homes, for example. At the end of the day, we need to wipe down workshop equipment, including test equipment, test devices, lifting device controls, focusing on points of contact. And this may be necessary after use of specific items of equipment where there are multiple users. Isolate all electrical devices and equipment controls prior to them being wiped down. And again, don't use wet sanitizing products on electrical switches or equipment controls where moisture ingress may present a risk of electric shock. So moving on to delivery and collection processes on slide 12. Considering equipment handover at customer sites, prior to performing delivery tasks, we must ensure that the relevant information, instruction, and training has been suitably communicated to all drivers so they know exactly what's expected of them during the handover procedure of equipment. When we take phone calls from the client is an ideal time to establish what their requirements are and what we expect of them. If there's any specific requirements when we arrive at site, that is the ideal time to determine exactly what's necessary. It may be practicable to carry out trial handover exercises before we actually implement them, so we can practice them where it's safe and practicable to do so. This may be specific to more complicated deliveries of more complicated pieces of equipment. Our equipment comes in many shapes and sizes, and loading and unloading practices can vary massively because of different types of equipment and the associated equipment handling facilities that we have on board our vehicles, and the arrangements that may be on site, including cranes and the likes. So all operatives performing delivery tasks must be provided with their appropriate PPE. This may not have changed. This may be the same PPE that's always been provided. But we have to assess the risk, and the relevant information, instruction and training must be suitably communicated with regards to the PPE we provide. I think because of the changes, disposable gloves are going to become more widely used, and it will be good practice to provide the drivers of our vehicles with disposable gloves. We've also must consider the requirements specific to the clients when we arrive on site, depending on the environments which the equipment's being delivered to. So PPE and RPE site-specific requirements have to be considered. Construction sites are not required to use respiratory protective equipment for COVID-19 where social distancing measures can be met. However, depending on the nature of the site or location, they might have specific requirements for RPE, and this should be determined with the client prior to delivery. Prior to the handover equipment, ensure that the equipment controls, switches and handles and steering devices have been sanitized to reduce the potential risk of spreading infections. Again, be mindful of electrical contact and with sprays and wet wipes. And we should, again, if necessary, consult the manufacturers to make sure that we're cleaning the equipment and keeping with their expectations. Prior to carrying out delivery collection of equipment, communicate the proposed handover procedure to the hirer and establish all potential restrictions that will need to be observed during the delivery and handover of the equipment. This is to determine the acceptance of the equipment by the customer as well. So gathering all the necessary information pertaining to the delivery, including the contact information, the communication arrangements on arrival, confirming social distancing requirements, the availability of hand washing and sanitization facilities, and the use of the welfare facilities on site should it be necessary for our drivers, and the safe loading and unloading arrangements that we require of the client and they require of us. And again, determining the PPE requirements and safe storage arrangements for the equipment on site, and any further site-specific requirements. If we need to prepare equipment for on-site demonstration, where we establish that it's possible, it's a good idea to carry an appropriate quantity of suitable temporary barriers on the vehicle for delivery. This can provide a practical equipment demonstration area when we get to site, as determined necessary, where this can be suitably and safely facilitated at the destination. The barriers may be utilized wherever practicable and safe to do so in order to provide segregation and suitable distance for working demonstrations or familiarization handovers of hire equipment. This is also relevant for maintenance fitters attending site for equipment servicing, routine maintenance or breakdowns. I can assure you that there's nothing worse for a fitter than getting an unexpected tap on the shoulder from behind whilst working under an engine canopy. I've received feedback from members whose fitters have been approached by inquisitive site operatives who aren't maintaining social distancing measures. So plastic barriers, for example, are an effective way of preventing breaching social distancing, and for other safety reasons such as visibility to vehicles and machinery operating on site, allowing fitters to work without distraction and minimizing the risk of injury. Prior to and on arrival on site, it may be deemed necessary for delivery drivers to find an appropriate place to pull over and park the vehicle, turn off the ignition, in order that they can call the site contact to confirm that they're ready to accept delivery of the goods. Once on site, the driver should establish that the loading or unloading practices can be facilitated and that the site operatives are practicing social distancing. The driver should have the ability to decide whether or not it's safe to proceed, and if necessary, refuse. It's probably a good idea to inform the branch before he leaves site of the difficulties. This may be resolved quite easily by the branch contacting the responsible person on site in order that the arrangements can be facilitated. We have a list of links to guidance and various document websites within our guidance document. Although we were delivering this webinar today, the guidance was last reviewed on the 18th of May. We've spoken with members operating across the 4 nations in the UK and the Republic of Ireland, as we are aware that the devolved governments concerned have some variations in their respective guidance and compliance requirements. And we've endeavoured to capture the core guidance requirements communicated from the information published in our sector-specific guidance document. Well, that's it for me at the moment, and I'd like to thank you all for listening. I hope it's been intuitive, and thank you.
Carl, thanks very much for taking us through the guidance. And as you mentioned, it's been put together with a number of people from industry and checking and referencing with the various different government agencies and bodies across the UK and Ireland. As an association, we do continue to publish our COVID-19 advice and guidance, and there are lots of handy links that are put into the document to help people, including what Carl's gone through with us today. As an association, we're on hand to work with our members and support via the telephone, email, using the 8x8 video chat and sharing screen. And our colleague Sonia would be delighted to talk to you if you are after further information. A copy of this guidance can be available from this link. We will send out a copy of this as well to all the people that have joined us today, which is pleasing to see how many people have actually joined. So thank you for that. I mentioned earlier about e-learning. And as I say, we're delighted to say that the HEE members e-learning portal is open. My colleague Nikki will be able to help and will send around links after this. I've just noticed a mistake on something there. But we'll get it round to everybody so you can have a look. The first 2 modules are live right now. And next week, we've got 2 additional webinars taking place. On Thursday at 1 o'clock, we're doing a webinar which is looking at people working remotely and getting back to home and the challenges faced by employers and how you support employees doing that. And also maybe people who are continuing to work from home, or if you've got staff that are doing both or coming in or whatever. We've also got a session the following day, which is around building business resilience. And again, following the webinars, we'll have e-learning modules available for people to join into. Hopefully you found this informative. It's only the second one that we've done, but we're getting better as we progress with these things. The key thing is we're working on behalf of you, our members, to get information out there, to provide advice, guidance and support. On behalf of my colleagues at HE and Carl and everybody else, could I say thank you for joining us on the webinar, and I look forward to catching up with you shortly. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, 2 that were submitted before the webinar started, and 1 which has actually come in, which I can just pick up before we go. Carl, what's the most practical and important things you should do to minimize the risk of infection?
2 key practical measures which we've covered today, and we can't reiterate these enough, is practicing social distancing. Ensure that we've done all we can to manage this. Practicing effective hand washing measures and effective hygiene arrangements and how we manage that. The key to this being implemented effectively is good management and communication with the workforce to onboard everybody, I think, to make sure that we've managed the process, we've communicated it, and there's a clear understanding of what the expectations are.
Thank you. There's one coming from the candidate delegate on the call. How should you deal with someone who comes to hire a product that they haven't previously arranged?
Okay. A lot of our colleagues and members are putting plastic barriers or screens, I should say, at the trade counters, and obviously practicing social distance arrangements. I'm not sure whether this is because the equipment isn't perhaps ready for hire and it needs to be cleaned. I've spoken with some members who've got various intuitive ways of communicating with staff who work behind the scenes preparing equipment. Some of them are using walkie-talkies so they don't have to go face-to-face or leave the counter areas, which is a great idea if it's practicable. It might not be practicable for everybody. You could pick up the phone if they've got telephones at the back. We could use text messaging to colleagues who are involved in getting the equipment out from the storage areas to customers. We should organise drop-off points and collection points. Once we've established the requirements of the client at the trade counter with social distancing measures in place, we can advise the client to go and sit in their vehicle at the collection point, which we've designated, and tell them where we'll be leaving the equipment for them to collect or put in the vehicle or load on their vehicle, and effectively tell them to remain in the vehicle until they've the member or the colleague has left the equipment there and vacated the area for them to access the equipment. So yeah, we're introducing measures as simple as that, where we have designated areas for collection. We can communicate with the staff without having to work face-to-face, where we can organise equipment to be put into dispatch areas for client collection. So yeah, there's a whole host of measures we can do and practical arrangements we can put in place. I think it's a different way of thinking for us all, and it'll probably take some getting used to, and we've just got to think about it logically as well.
Thanks, Carl. Another one that was sent in by somebody who couldn't join us, but we'll listen to the replay of this. You may have covered it already, but I'll ask it because it was asked of us. How do you practice social distancing if you need to send out 2 employees in a vehicle to collect or deliver a piece of equipment?
Yes, similarly to traveling to work and people working together, where I had a similar question raised from one of our members who had read the guidance document with regards to 6-4 mixers or 5 3.5 cement mixers on the site mixers and loading them onto the vehicles where they've got ramps or tail lifts, and needing to send 2 people out in a vehicle to do that. And again, pairing of the workforce. So we have 2 people working together who are on the same shift. Perhaps they're the same 2 people who travel to work together, so that we're not introducing other people into the risk factor. And again, ventilating the vehicles by opening the windows, good hygiene arrangements in the vehicles, wiping down touch points, hard surfaces, minimizing the contact with those surfaces by the passenger, and cleaning down the vehicles at the end of every day routinely. Not talking to each other while facing each other, facing away from each other. Obviously, the driver of the vehicle has to drive the vehicle safely and should follow the current legislation with regards to road transport, and we can't get away from that. So we have to do what is practicable. We have to minimize the close contact or like we say, two-person close proximity working. We have to minimize the time of exposure as best we can.
Thanks, Carl. A comment from one of the candidates on the call that was helpful. It might be useful if the daily staff briefing could also be done outside wherever possible as well.
Yeah, in the open air is a great idea. Obviously, weather permitting, or if we've got a covered area outside for doing that, ideal. That is absolutely ideal. Again, if they're doing that, we should practice social distancing and do it in well-ventilated areas. Larger areas, the better.
Well, Carl, thanks very much for going through those questions. As I say, we had some before sent in, and we just like to say a big thank you for everybody listening to us today, and those that will catch up on the replay of this. And we wish you well, and we look forward to catching up with you hopefully next Thursday and Friday when we have webinars on again, and also catching up doing the e-learning. Thanks very much, everybody, and stay safe.
Thank you.